Thank you for all joining. So it's no news here that we're in this middle of explosion of data. And while we have this giant explosion of data and explosion of solutions within this industry, it's also not a secret that a lot of those solutions end up being point solutions. They're not really embedded into the core enterprise experience. Maybe some of the older firms are there, but most of them are not. Most of them end up being point solutions and very siloed within the organization. Some interesting examples, I think, that have been doing really well, being embedded in that core. VTS, I think, has done a really good job in expanding. I think Procore is another really good example of that. Placer is another good example of that, kind of in the retail space. So we see a couple of different pockets where that's the case, but we have the opportunity today to see some of the folks who are kind of at that other side of the house, which is either the sourcing of the deal, kind of Raj and his world, how do we get that early beginning of that deal, and then on the DealCloud side of the house, how do we start building that pipeline for those deals as well? And I know there's some overlap between you two in the middle there, but maybe starting with Ted, if you can tell us a little more about why some of the folks like these firms and others that are embedded in the core enterprise experience, why are they able to do that today? Maybe it's something that might have been really challenging 2-3 years ago, and then maybe we'll talk, Raj and Ben, talk a little about maybe how you've been able to break through some of those barriers.
I think maybe it's a very, to your point, there are point solutions. So I think in my mind, it's either whether it's a feature.
Wait a second. Can you all hear him well? No? OK. How about the handheld mic? Maybe that will work.
Yeah, there you go.
Try that one.
It's better now?
Yeah, there we go.
So to L.D., to your point, what I see is really whether this is a point solution or really it's a feature that tackles a particular issue, or it can or will be turned into a platform. So I think that's why we see BTS is really great. They start, maybe the MVP, it's how we can manage the leasing pipeline, but they turn into a full platform with a lot of added features, like it's a full-blown product. So I think that's how we see as a user that's more valuable. But on the other hand, we actually don't mind some of those point solutions because you can't find a one-size-fits-all. There's going to be customization based on what our processes will be or what the feature state we want to be, and we want to be able to integrate that into our tech stack ecosystem. So I think on that note, our end goal is consolidate data, not necessarily consolidate tools. So, and nowadays, everyone with all the connectivity in mind to build that. So they're really enable us to try out even some of the point solution. If it's really good, cutting edge, we can just take it. And it's become also modular, right? If something better comes out, we can kind of swap it, change it to a new one.
I think one of the interesting points is it used to be just a few years ago where firms were like, we want to find one system to rule them all, one accounting system, one reporting system, whereas today we hear mostly from clients, we want to be known as the firm that doesn't tell any of our partners what solutions they want to use. We want them to use whatever's best in class, and it's our job as the top of the house, our meaning the asset managers, to figure out how those things speak to each other. That shouldn't be their problem. So it's an interesting point. Raj, tell us a little about kind of your world.
Sure. Actually, just before I do, I'm really curious, by show of hands, how many of you are working for a technology or data company? OK. And how many of you are working for a real estate company? So 50-50. OK, very cool. So this question about how do you get embedded as a sort of enterprise-wide solution is something I've thought a lot about, purely because over the years I've failed at getting multiple software products adopted many times and learned a lot of lessons.
Raj isn't telling you. He's sold a previous company, at least one, to Altus Group, which is also still embedded there and has also worked at Brookfield on the other side of the house, right? So
lots of mistakes. Lots of mistakes made. So there's not working at Brookfield. Everything was perfect at Brookfield. No. But I guess there's probably a couple of things I'd want to say about this problem, right? Which is pretty existential for us as a startup. The first is, common sense would dictate that if you have a solution that helps people do something, faster, cheaper, better than they otherwise could, they would thank you for that. They would adopt it. They'd use it. But they don't actually in practice, right? And it's because, as L.D. mentioned, there are lots and lots and lots of vendors out there and solutions out there that offer essentially the same, right? We'll do it quicker, we'll do it cheaper, we'll do it better. So you really have to end up as one of the top 1 or 2 priorities for the people you're selling to. The most rare thing for most of our customers is not time or money, it's their attention span. And on top of their day-to-day work, they really only have the mental capacity to focus on 1 or 2 strategic priorities at a time. So the goal is really to be one of those 2 strategic priorities. And if you are one of those priorities for a handful of people, oh, now I've got 2 mics, maybe? Or maybe not. You guys know me? Okay. You can end up having some success as a point solution, solving problems for a department, but if you want to be embedded across the enterprise, you have to align with organizational level priorities. And that's why I think VTS was so successful. If you're an asset manager, there aren't very many priorities higher than leasing your buildings, right? And no manager is going to get a leasing platform, and it's going to not be a massive organization-wide undertaking, right? It's not going to end up being a point solution by any stretch of the imagination. So, we think that for investors, getting deals done is kind of one of those organization-level priorities. The second thing I'd say is that you really got to make sure the solution is embedded in a business process and is part of a very specific job that someone's trying to do, right? And a lot of folks in the data space, think your mission is to provide insights, intelligence, but no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go to work today and get insights, right? They have more specific things they're focused on, right? They're not even necessarily underwriting a deal, right? They're completing page 7 of the investment memo. And on page 7, they have to present 3 deals they've looked at in the last 6 months side by side with the deal they're trying to get the IC to approve, and they've got to compare a certain set of metrics, right? So making sure that your product fits right into that process is actually part of the flow of what people are doing in that day. It's part of their job, how they actually get their job done, is super important. And this stat might be a little dated. I read it a few years ago, but something like 70% of data warehousing and BI projects fail. I've been part of a lot of those failed projects, and I think the main reason is that BI solutions often end up kind of off to the side, right? They're not part of the flow, and people forget they're there. They're very valuable, but they just literally forget they're there, right? So the question is, how do you embed those insights into the workflow, into the process, so you can't get around them? There you go.
That's awesome. And Ben, you started DealCloud before most of us even realized what problems we're solving, and not only successfully sold to some of the largest enterprises in the world, also were able to take the company public and go through that journey. So what does that look like? How did you get yourself into some of those enterprises, especially in those early days, before there was risk takers like the folks in the room?
Yeah, so we observed a couple trends. I think if you rewind the clock about 10 years ago and you look at the first SaaS cloud-based companies, Salesforce, Microsoft, NetSuite, SAP and Oracle had some products. That was really organizations' first attempt to leverage like next generation cloud-based technology. And they were coming at it from a horizontal standpoint. They were like, we're going to sell Walmart, Target, Exxon, we're going to sell this product to every single business that can possibly buy it. And a lot of firms, I think, across the world had their first experience with technologies like that going back a decade ago. And very quickly, really as the development cost of software came down, you saw the first versions of industry-specific cloud companies. And the areas where those were really taking shape were in the industries that were dramatically different than your traditional operating company, right? So if you're running a manufacturing business or a business where you sell a customer product, it's pretty easy to put kind of horizontal software in there. But if you worked in the insurance business, or you worked in the real estate business, or you worked in the life sciences business, those products just didn't work for your business models. And so, we rewind the clock to when we were getting going, and the vision was, hey, a lot of these firms that are out there operating are underserved by your traditional big horizontal companies. And so, for the first time ever, it's not hundreds of millions of dollars to build a business and to build technology that can actually serve these industries. So you had some really big wins, like Viva is a $30+ billion market cap that just focused on life sciences and did it. Guidewire is worth $5 billion, after the last couple weeks, but they just did it for insurance. And we came at it on the alternative investment side. And if you think about your business, if you're an investor, or if you work at a real estate firm, the way that these firms operate is so fundamentally different. Generally revenue producers, generally deal teams, everybody at the firm chases deals, produces, sources, executes. And so you have this huge layer of these organizations that need software, need procedure, need support, but it's not I sell you product, you buy product from me. It's I put together a complex transaction that has many moving parts to it. I'm putting $100 million of equity or debt into a transaction. I have partners all across the space that are doing that. So our thesis was like, that's a complicated market. It's a good market. You guys are great credits. You make a lot of money. Your businesses are successful. And so we're like, let's go there and build software for that. And, you know, in the early days, and I mean, you know, Raj and I have known each other for a long time. We compete a little bit, but like have tremendous, you know, respect for the businesses and the strategies. In the early days, it's hard because like you go to vendor management at Brookfield and they're like, how big are you? How much cash is on your balance sheet? You know, we're worried about doing business with you because there's risk there. Or like, what's your data security and procedures? Do you have enough for us to trust you? And, you know, I think the industry orientation of best-of-breed software has taken shape where firms get more value from the product. Even though the company's smaller than Salesforce or Microsoft, they're like, we're willing to do that now because we get more value from the product. And so you get a win there. Like the market is generally recognizing the idea that we're not going to get fired because we didn't hire IBM on this. We're actually going to win because we're buying stuff that like works for our business in a best-of-breed scenario. And so, you know, that transition through the market over the last decade has really, I think, laid the groundwork for great best-of-breed software that you can buy to serve your businesses, and then secondarily to like make that sing inside of an organization and to drive great outcomes for users and the customer. Software rails and like dashboards and ability like don't take shape without information. So there's a bunch of ways you can come at that. You can like look at the customer and say, you have to do this. Your compensation is tied to using a product. And so the CEO of the company can get up and say, we're going to make this investment and we're going to jam this through the organization. That works sometimes. Or you can figure out a way, like Raj was talking about, to successfully capture the data from the organization without them having to use it and present it back to them. That's a pretty good way to do it. Or you can also take data from market data providers and the leading companies in the market, and you can feed that into the machine to create value in the screen for them. So there's kind of three ways to come at it, and I think the most successful companies are doing all three. They're saying, hey, you have to use this product. Hey, let me show you all the value that's here, and hey, I'm going to bring a bunch of other stuff into this that's going to make it valuable for you. So, you know, we spend all of our time trying to make great software and build great user experience and get people to use it and have a wonderful thing. But if you match that with Cherre Data, right, or whatever data you need for your use case or your thing, you can drive significantly better adoption, significantly more value. So, you know, I think there's a couple dynamics. One, it's industry-specific best-of-breed software, and two, making sure that you're seeding that in a strategy that works for your business. So that's kind of been the way that we've made our way into the market and the enterprise. And certainly it's nice when you finally get your SOC 2 and have enough have enough audits to get through the security reviews.
SOC 2 is fun.
Stop doing the song and dance at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah. So by the way, we have folks here from all the major cloud providers. And by the way, thank you for being incredible partners. But one of the things that you mentioned is about how horizontal solutions struggle oftentimes to give that value. And I think that's true for all the cloud solutions here. Somebody correct me if you have a different solution. But I think all of them are really focused on that. How do we verticalize these different cloud solutions for insurance, for real estate, for healthcare, for some of these major industries? Because there's a lot of synergies, obviously, within that world. You all talked about data, right, in different ways, right? How data can add value to clients and how analytics in itself maybe is a sideshow and how you don't care about the applications. You really care about the data coming out of those, right? You're not trying to connect the applications, it's the data that you want. So let's talk a little about the data there. Maybe starting with you, Ted. What is actually driving your data strategy, right? It's clearly not because some random dashboard matters or you're not connecting data for data's sake. So what's actually driving the need for it within your organization and what's that looking like today?
Yeah, so I think it's all about like really how we look at the whole value chain in terms of data, right? Before we like go out and say, what data we need, first we ask like what question we want answer for, right? And that really drives the whole discussion of now how do we get like to get the answer, what do we need for, and then where's the data sits. And I think there's actually lots of opportunities here at Brookfield for us to do a lot more of those because, everyone knows real estate is a local business, no matter how big or how global you are. So we've been operating on a very decentralized basis for very good reasons, but it's kind of a nightmare for building a data infrastructure. So that's why, before we partnered with Raj, our global pipeline is still operated on an email and Excel based. So that's just one example of, how we
I'm being told for you to use the handheld and not the, just the handheld. Yeah, that
this
one. Yeah, we're getting a signal. That one's better.
Okay, this is better. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So really, right, so this is a good example. We first have an issue, right? We don't have a good efficiency in terms of running our pipeline call, but also as a result, by running the current or the old way, we lost all of the valuable data along with it, right? Like 5 years from now, we won't know what was discussed on the pipeline call, if we didn't have a solution like this. So this is really how we think about our data strategies, what question we want to answer first, and then how do we go back to the source. And then there's a series of things we need to do, right? Like, what are the right process, what are the right teams, what are the skill sets, but more importantly, what are the technologies and tools we're bringing into the fold. So we really need all three parts to come to that. And that not only apply to internal data sources, but also market data, right? We don't want to just go out and sign contracts with all the market data vendors, right? We want to first know what we want to know, right? Whether it's to understand better on supply demand for single family and what are the factors, and then from there we start, running pilots to what are the data sets that's available for that, piece of work.
So the number one takeaway I would take here is, yes, you want to connect all your data, but don't start with that as the primary goal. Don't start with I want to connect my data. Start with what business objective am I trying to achieve, right? Am I trying to automate reporting for efficiency? Am I trying to get insight into churn? Am I trying to get some kind of information about which markets were performing better or worse and why, right? Start with the questions with the business users. That what do they actually care about? What moves the needle for them? Tell them if you could wave a magic wand, and enterprise people, we don't think that very far ahead, right? We think about immediate problems that we have, and that's a good thing in this scenario, right? So if you could wave a magic wand, what are the things that you would do right this second to solve your world? And then work your way back and see what things are solvable within the data world, because usually there's something you can do very quickly to drive that efficiency. Maybe starting with you, Ben, now. What are some of the data sets, or not just the data sets, what's driving the data strategy within kind of your organization, right? You spent a lot of time focused on more the workflow side of the house, and over the last kind of maybe 18 months, maybe a lot more focused on the data side of the house. So what's driving that shift into data, and where do you think that goes in the near future?
So I'm on the mic now, okay.
Yeah.
I would break it down in a couple different areas. Our customer is generally an investor. Sometimes it's an advisor who's helping to sell a business or execute a transaction, but generally it is an investor, developer, somebody who's looking to put money or capital to work and generate a return. And so, we have built a ton of software to help them work through the pipeline and the workflows and all those things, but at the very front end of that process, they want market data. So they want to know what's happening in all these markets. They want to identify the ones that they think are good, and they want to develop a strategy for their firm, which is like, we're gonna make these types of investments in these areas, and we're gonna do it this way, right? We do multifamily in the Southeast. We do, there's hundreds of different strategies that develop. And so usually from a data perspective, the first thing they want in their systems is market data on the market so that they can evaluate them in combination with their firm strategy. So that's kind of piece number one. And we get that and pull that in from a lot of different places. I think we have 15 to 20 data integrations depending on what your strategy is and the type of firm you are. Then as you progress through the workflows and the relationship there, you want asset level data. It's like, oh yeah, I'm in these markets. This is working for my strategy. I want information on this property. I want information on this company, and so that's usually like firmographic, demographic, the things you get from somebody's website. A lot of people aggregate that, and you get that a lot of different places. So you go from the market data to the asset level data or the company level data, and then the third piece of that is, okay, who sits around that? That could be the people who work there, people who own it, board members, sponsors, and so we go from market data to asset level data, and then individual level data. And so those three things in combination tend to, for most of our customers, tend to make up what they're looking for at the beginning in terms of how do I develop a strategy, how do I execute a deal, and more importantly, how do I get an angle on it, right? I mean, it's very competitive. There's a lot of firms generally pursuing the same thing. And so how do I win? And, so those three data sets in combination, if you can add some intelligence on that to say, this is my best relationship, this is my volume with them, this is where I make most of my money from my firm, and you can answer questions like that around pipeline data, around asset level data, you can actually be better with the technology and have an angle for the win or increase your win rates. And so most of the deployments we're working on for customers like include all three of those things. And then from there, you take all that and you put that into BI. You take all that, you put that into portfolio management once you've won and operate and own the asset or are running it. And then you push it into the accounting systems. So there's this kind of whole sourcing and origination component of the technology, and there's tons of data inputs into that, dozens. And then there's a data push into all the other software systems that help run assets. So I'd say there's two components of it, like all the things you need to make good decisions and invest and run a pipeline and run a funnel and put money to work. But then it's moving data through your organization consistently, even if it's hitting a bunch of different systems, so that you're not all tabbing and keying stuff in and killing the analyst. And I started my career as an advisor in banking and as an analyst, and it's just all tab. It was all tab all day. 6 different data screens. I'm gonna go and like pull all this data and like get an opinion. And then once you had it all, you moved it to Excel and then moved it to PowerPoint and then moved it to the customer. And so a big part of like what we're trying to do is create a seamless experience, across all those systems and pull that data together.
So Raj, you guys took a slightly different approach, and it's probably the reason why you guys are getting a lot of traction, where looking at that really, really beginning of the funnel, where most people, the deal starts with I enter it into the system, right? Whereas you took a different approach, and you're also obviously collecting a data asset that I think nobody else has, correct me if I'm mistaken. Talk to me a little about how you thought about that as a strategy to even start with, and then as you start developing that strategy further, what other directions are you taking there? What's that data asset that you're building? What value you're going to be driving for your clients, especially in the longer run?
Yeah, absolutely. For every deal that an investor has in their pipeline, they probably looked at 20 or 30 other potential investments. And like any pipeline, whether it's a sales pipeline or recruiting pipeline, your ability to quickly make that screening decision, that qualifying decision, which of these deals am I going to spend more time on, that has a really huge impact on the overall efficiency of your investment process, right? If you're passing on deals after spending a month on them, you probably missed a deal you could have actually closed in the meantime, right? And what we observed was that a lot of the data that was available that folks were using was really useful for market selection. And Ben actually kind of alluded to this, right? A lot of the public data sets that are kind of location-based help you narrow in on where you should invest. But when it comes to actually deciding, is this a good investment, this asset a good investment, a lot of the information is unstructured. It's not really available on any platform that you can go and download or get access to. It's typically coming at you in spreadsheets and PDFs and different just documents from brokers and sellers and whatnot. So the approach we took was to essentially allow investors to interact with that information as if it was structured by actually structuring it, right? So we take PDFs, we take spreadsheets, we take Word documents, and we extract all the information, and we give investors the ability to look at every potential investment at the very top of their pipeline. So let's start with the 20, not the 1, right? People don't put the deal they're working on in Origin. They put every deal they could work on in Origin. And they actually look at the deal in Origin as if it was something they owned, right? They can navigate the rent roll, they can look at the operating statement, they can put that literally in their portfolio and see how it compares to other things they previously purchased. So we saw that as a bit of a gap, right? We saw that unstructured data really wasn't coming in and being easy to use. But then the next step we took was, and took the step pretty early with Cherre and some other folks in the room, with the RCA sitting over there, hi Brian, was overlaying the other information you need to make that quick screening decision. And one of the things that we're really excited about, and we think Cherre's at the forefront of this, is the ability to more quickly get at the type of information you typically wouldn't start to use until you're further down the process. The ability to get that information earlier, we think is going to make a huge impact on the efficiency of the investment process, right? Because we heard from our clients again and again that deals were being lost or killed at step 6 because that's when they ran this type of analysis. That's when they ran this sort of report. And the ability to get some of that data via API, ability to get that data and actually present it literally at the first screen means that you can identify the good deals earlier, which gives you an opportunity to get out in front of the competition and potentially even bid a little higher because you've got more information to support your investment thesis. So yeah, that's really that's what we've been focused on, and we think there's a long runway there because as we've been talking about, there's a lot more information. A lot of the folks in this room are bringing that information to the surface and making it available. And going back to what Ted said, I mean, really, our big vision is to give investors that one place where this information comes together right when they need it while making those investment decisions.
I'll make one more comment. I just thought of something as you were talking about that. It's really your software provider's jobs to do this for you ultimately. I mean, we need to get the technology. The technology is already at the point where it can do that, so it's all about just like executing it. One of the big things that we found this year was there is an insane amount of structured data in your Microsoft Exchange server, in your email, in your contact list, in all of the meetings that you have, in the signatures that exist across everybody's inbox in your firm. And we developed a technology that without you doing anything will connect into your Exchange server and will grab and scrape 100% of that data and auto-populate it into the technology for you as a way to just like to your point, like pull these data sets together in one place, and it needs to be automated, right? A data entry burden for your companies was a very 5 to 10 year ago thing, and that's how you had to use software. But today we can actually go in and extract that, and it is structured. So because it's structured, we can bring it in and present it in that structured way. So I know you're doing that a bunch of different ways. We did this thing this year with Microsoft Exchange, which has been super successful and just low-hanging fruit, I think, for a lot of these firms to capture data.
I just want to point something that Raj mentioned, or didn't mention, but around that. So roughly 40% of all major commercial transactions are the top 100 players in the industry. You'd think it's a really, really big number, but it isn't, right? And roughly 40% of the other transactions in the industry are kind of onesies, right? So the local 7-Eleven buying from the owner, right? That's about 40%. And there's another 20, which are kind of the middle and larger players, right? So if you sat on the pipeline for those 40% of those large firms, you would see more than 80% of all transactions in the industry, right? So when you think about what type of data assets can be built by sitting on top of that pipeline, just by sitting on those top firms, you're getting a slight sense of how much of the volume you're actually looking at. We have a lot of data vendors in the audience right now. And there are a lot that are not here, and thank you all for being great partners for us, mostly for our clients. Maybe starting with you, Ted. Tell us a little about some of the data vendors that you're maybe most excited, that you're deploying right now or that you're excited about. And if you guys don't feel comfortable talking about a specific name, type of data set, and feel free to call out your favorite vendors. It's a good time for it.
Yeah, I think for now, like our main focus on the corporate level is to get our hands on our own data better. But in terms of the market data, we do work hands in hand with a lot of our sector teams. And to your point, L.D., like commercial real estate data is still very siloed, segmented, it's still pretty dirty, but we're actually excited about SFR data. And I know you're very passionate about SFR as well, because they're, just to piggyback on other points too, right? If we have a system there are actually a lot of, point that like data generating point along with your decision making. And if you look at the volume of how we do transactions, right, you could have a team of 20 working on one large office tower deal for months. But then for the FFR team, literally the analysts on the team, they're looking at hundreds of homes a day, right? So how we can better capture those kind of decision points and then be smart at it to say, all right, here's why this analyst passed this deal or why he advanced this one and how we can be smart at, making that part of the job more efficient is really what we're looking for. But also, I think in general, we also want to be smart at like market screening, how we can find, the next hotspot before everyone else. But, I think everyone else is trying to solve that problem. So we're still early on that, but we're really excited about that as well.
That's awesome. Raj, you mentioned RCA, but tell us a little more about some of the, for those who don't know RCA, right, really great data set for both property data, but also for cap rates and comps. Tell us about some of the data sets that you're most excited to continue adding for your clients.
This is not going to come as a surprise to anybody, right? But obviously ESG. For us, it's all about helping our customers get.
When you say ESG, do you mean energy, or do you mean actually the S and G as well?
The S more and more, the G less so. And actually, it's not really about energy. It's everything, right? So it's the environmental risk, but also the environmental impact of the asset. Because it's really all about helping investors make those investment decisions. And more we're hearing from more and more of our customers that they have to answer questions about the impact, about the risk, about the societal impact, and the social impact potential of the deals that they're doing, and that's becoming part of their investment process, which means they have to get the data somehow. They've got to get it, they've got to organize it, they've got to present it. So our roadmap around data integration is heavily pointed in that direction for that reason.
I would second that. Right now we're like most excited about Cherre. It's what you guys are doing is changing the way that this is being done in the market. It is insanely convenient for us to have you doing that.
I heard 15 connection earlier. I don't think we're doing 15, so somebody on the account team needs to work on that, right? Yeah.
But I mean it sincerely. Like for a decade, it's been one-off API integrations. It's been data warehousing strategies. There's so many different ways you can do this stuff, and we've done it with S&P, CapIQ, PitchBook, Morningstar, FactSet, and there's a gazillion small data companies, BVD's popular in Europe. Like there's just so many of them we've done it with, and it's been trying. We get it, we accomplish it, but what you guys are doing and the way you're doing it is new and different, but it's leading right now, and it's being done the right way. So like we're most excited here. Do a lot of stuff with Google, a lot of stuff with Esri. Looking at varying things like CompStack and the RCAs of the world, and it's so from our perspective, we really want to do them all because it's like you want to meet the customer where they are, and the ESG thing is just on fire right now. There's so much demand for that, but we're very similar, I think, to your thesis and the culture of your company and some of the things. We're like, we just want to be Switzerland, and if you want data rails and data and information into your software, we're going to do everything we can to accommodate that and meet you where you are as a user. So we've got about 50,000 people globally using the technology, and it's not like all of those individuals want something different, but there are huge categories of users that are like, well, I want it this way, and I want it this way, and I want to see this way. So we're trying to accommodate that. I would say the other thing on the data side that we're just seeing an explosion of Snowflake right now across the industry where, it's not really a data provider, but they're capturing, scaling, storing data in a way that's starting to change the game. So our clients are tending to take all the data.
Best marketing ever, by the way, Snowflake.
All the data that we're bringing together, that's now tending to float towards Snowflake. So.
Absolutely, and we obviously do a lot of work with the teams there. Maybe staying with you for a second, Ben. Tell us about maybe one or two areas where data is just missing, right? Where we just don't have the data, and there aren't data providers in this room that can just solve it for you.
I think there's a couple areas. The returns data on the investment at the funds level is hit or miss. It's being aggregated by some firms, and it's not great data. It's scraped data. A lot of firms have that internally. So there's spots there on returns and portfolio management that I think really need improvement. There's, on the source and origination side, there's spots with smaller assets where it's just like you can't get it. You have to pick up the phone and call. So, I think there's some interesting companies that are starting to fill in some of those areas and source that data in ways other than digging through the trash and like scraping paperwork. The ESG data is like all over the place. Like we still don't know what the structure for this data is going to be. You saw our friend Mr. Musk in the news yesterday being kicked off the list with S&P, and he's like, how can Exxon like be a top 10 ESG company and I'm not even making the list? And I think that's just because there's like systematic failure in what that data is going to be and how we capture it. So there's big gaps there. I don't know if you guys would jump in on that.
Just before you answer that, raise your hand if your firm tracks ESG metrics as an organization. Keep your hand up if there's a benchmark you have to meet.
Yeah.
0. There we go. Oh, we got 1, 2 over there. Yeah, awesome. Keep going. That was the point I was trying to make. Yeah.
I'll probably be pretty brief here because I'm hesitant to say something's missing because there's so many data vendors now, and if I say something's missing, I'm probably going to end up offending someone in this room who's like, I have that data. But one thing that's definitely missing for us is data anywhere other than the United States, honestly. We have customers like Brookfield and PGIM and Goodman's and Quadrille who have people all over the world, and we can work with groups like Cherre and Statebook and RCA to give them actually RCA is global, so the only data partner we have that's actually global. But for the most part, once you're investing outside the US, it's just much harder to get that information. I would love if someone, L.D., maybe could work on that.
I echo that. It's true. So Canada, England is usually like the first place our clients typically go out, and obviously we're very active there. But then as we go into more countries in Europe, it gets more and more challenging. We rely on local data sets, not just at the country level, but at the local state level. And then you come to countries like Germany where you have to have a nexus to the transaction to have access to the data, meaning you have to be the buyer, the seller, the attorney, or the accountant, and you can only use the data for that specific stated purpose, right? So you have to buy from data vendors there, which are, I'll use the word scrupulous, but whatever term you decide you want to use there to define those data vendors, and it gets really, really hard to be able to get really high quality data. So something we're definitely working on, and partners in the room who are actively spending more time. And thank you for buying Dacia, by the way, RCA. Made our life a lot easier. But as you expand into these markets, it's definitely something very interesting for us. So if you have more markets that we're not working with you on, let us know, because our clients definitely want to be using those as fast as possible. What are you missing, Ted?
Yeah, I would second Raj's point. Like international data is really, really missing for us. Like even we have a lot more in the U.S. Even that is not great, and surprisingly, even Canada, we don't have a lot of good market data, which is really a surprise. And I'd say in general, ESG is definitely something we, like as an organization, is still focusing a lot more. So for that, we're lacking not only internal data, but also the benchmark data. And I think speaking of benchmark in general, back to being your point about return data, like we don't really necessarily care too much about, because for real estate, like each fund is kind of unique. It's hard to have a composite return that's benchmarkable to your own fund. But that's what our investors are looking for. So how we can get more quality or like representative benchmark data to match our different strategy across the board is really a challenge as well.
That's awesome. So you mentioned SFR earlier, and I am very passionate about it, but I'll tell you why. It's not because single-family homes are that exciting as a general rule. For those who don't know, single-family rental is an asset class that's always in theory existed, but it really didn't exist as an institutional asset class until the last recession, right? So around 08, 09, we had a lot of people who used to be able to afford houses, no longer could afford the houses they lived in. An invitation home starting part of that process. Blackstone was part of that, so Brad and the folks there thought, why don't we just buy all these homes from the people who can't afford to keep them, and we're just going to rent them right back to those same people who are already going to live in those homes. Because there's already the demand, clearly. They were buying those homes, now we're just going to rent it to them and manage it as an institutional type platform. We're going to manage, we'll paint, we'll put in a little work in the house, and we're going to maintain those assets, right? And it ballooned from, a tiny little asset class of a few 100,000 assets at the time. Today, there's roughly 18 million single-family rental units. There's about 14 to 15 coming on the market before the end of this decade. We're talking about 97, 98% occupancy. So for those who are in the multifamily, think if you could guarantee 98% occupancy over a 10-year period, which is pretty incredible. And that's for 25-year-old stock that hasn't been, basically some paint, right? That's about all that's being put into it, right? So we're not talking about brand new and stock that has some really cool apps or stuff like that, right? It's also kind of a sad story to a certain degree, right? Because these are people who used to be able to afford these homes, can no longer afford those homes, whether they can't put the down payment because they were in a risk group that should have never been able to afford the home in the first place, but were given to because of bad market incentives. Thank you, Ranieri, by the way. So a lot of really interesting things happen in that asset class. But today it's a really exciting asset class because it's a leader in the industry in what we're doing with data. Some of our partners in the room today, our clients, are able to buy assets that go on the MLS, the multiple listing system on the residential world, within 15 minutes, 5 minutes of it coming on the MLS. Now think of what that means for a second. Something went on the MLS, and 15 minutes later, I'm putting a bid on it. And 50% of the times, I win that asset, not necessarily the first bid I put on it. I'm not making a decision here that's really, really human focused. I already know everything about this asset. I already know everything about the market. The only thing that's changed is it's on market, a status change, and there's some list price. And I have to make a decision, is that in the box that I've already predefined, yes or no to a certain degree? And to me, that's really exciting because that's the epitome of a data-driven decision. You literally, humans can't do it fast enough, right? There's absolutely a data-driven decision. But then the flip side is SFR has always been kind of the bastard child of the commercial industry. It's not really part of the core commercial operations. A lot of folks in the commercial industry don't even think of SFR. They have their own little partnership fund on the side with a different name. They're not even calling it the same thing. So thinking about now the core real estate world, and I'll start with you, Ted. What is looking like that? What's the next asset class that's going to start functioning a little like that SFR world?
Yeah, I think it's a resi in general, right? We see a boom in multifamily, right? Like since the pandemic, and some interesting sectors, like to the extension of resi, like manufactured housing is actually a very interesting sector too, and we now
okay, manufactured housing, for those who don't know, means mobile homes, right? It just sounds really cool when we say manufactured housing, right? Yeah.
And to that point, it's not about the houses that's being manufactured. It's basically still a very much leasing business, right? We as a landlord, we own the pads that the houses sits on. But the renters actually own the house themselves. So it's really sticky because, those are kind of lower income communities, and it's actually quite a lot of work and expensive to move their house away if they want to move away. So that's one of the interesting sectors. And also senior housing and student housing in the U.S. is getting pretty hot as well. But in the Europe, it's been like booming for a few years already.
Yeah, so mobile housing, once it lands, it doesn't go anywhere. It's not really mobile. And there's a joke, look up, do you see wheels or not wheels? That tells you if it's a mobile home or manufactured. But jokes aside, those things don't churn, and if they do churn, they literally get foreclosed by the owner of the land, and they just put a new tenant in there. So these things never move. They're very, very sticky. There's usually wait lists on these things, which is insane to me when you think about that. Again, back to the human question there, but most of the people who live there can't afford anything else. And I think aging communities is something that's really interesting, right? We're all getting older, and we're staying alive longer, which is a really good thing. We're healthy, and we get to live much longer. But then the flip side is, when we're in our 70s and 80s, the regular housing supply that we've had up until now doesn't make sense. We're not going to be in 3-story houses, right? Where do we move into? How do we have communities allow us to transition into, fully independent to not fully independent in that kind of process? How do we make money off of those people in a good, positive way? Raj, to you, kind of same kind of line. What are some of those asset classes that are really exciting?
There's not going to be much to add here, honestly. I mean, the thing about SFR that obviously makes it very different from a data analytics point of view is that it's incredibly fungible, right? It's all location-based. Going back to that thing I said earlier about sort of market selection versus asset selection, there's no asset selection really with SFR. It's like if you like the location and you've got the general spec of the building, you can make a decision, right? And obviously, manufactured housing is similar. We are sort of seeing that a little bit. I'm looking over here for obvious reasons. With sort of last mile logistics, right? It's very location based, and if you have 20 data points about the property, you can make a decision. It's not necessarily about underwriting the tenant so much, although it obviously matters. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why you have volumes of pipeline and volumes of transactions on the logistics side that approach the multifamily and SFR side. You just don't see that in other sectors.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if I'll pick an asset class that's going to look like it, but if what they've done in SFR is just, it's mind-blowing. And to think, I'm sure many of you are homeowners, and I bet your phone rings all day with one of those providers trying to buy your house from you right now. So not only are they waiting for that market switch, the acquisition strategy is like is something that has never been built before in any investment industry. And so I think if you look at the dynamic of the industry, there's two things. There's one, super high volume. So the unit volume is tremendous, and the ASP, the sale price, and the dollar amount is low. And so I think that dynamic of that industry, if you just take that dynamic anywhere that exists, where the unit volume is super high, can be super high, and the average price can be super low, you're going to see data-driven models applied to that, period, the end, right? With what they've done in SFR, everybody's like, how can I do that in other places? You can't do that at Brookfield and Blackstone and Oxford because they're trading the same 100, 200, 300 assets just, and they don't, and when you're doing a $100 million transaction, you just can't make a $100 million transaction move that quickly. But so low ASP, high unit volumes, mobile manufactured 3D printed houses, you can pick them. I think that's where we're going to see these data-driven models applied, and it's scary because what you're watching is institutional ownership and invasion into an area that used to be reserved for a portion of the economy that is now being locked out of that asset. And so I know this wasn't the question, but I'll make the point anyways. I think the exciting thing is when we can get the 401ks and the IRAs and everybody's ability to invest into these asset classes unlocked. So like right now they're being locked out of being able to buy a house, which was your primary equity, value creator, being a homeowner. And so, okay, like that's going to happen because that's free market economy. But we need to now get the 401ks and the IRAs full circle into those institutional funds where the people are still getting, that type of appreciation and that type of pickup. Otherwise, we're gonna fracture the economy in a way where if you're not a participant in that, you can't get an 8, 9, 10, 12, 14% return, whatever it is. So I've just been absolutely blown away with what they've built from a data capture and sourcing strategy there.
It's interesting when we think about SFR, so we think about this as big institutional, but the reality is 90% is non-institutional today. And out of that 10%, right, only roughly 3-4 are large institutional, and it's getting really, really fastly institutionalized, but still, it's mostly non-institutional. And what's interesting is you also see the competition between the SFR buyers, right, the big funds, Invitation and Progress and American Home for Rent and Conrex and folks like that. And then you see the iBuyers or the different flavors of the iBuyers competing for those same markets. What's really interesting here is if you're allowed to rent in the community, the SFR folks are going to win. And the reason they're going to win is because they have a longer holding period. They're a lot less sensitive to the pricing. If they get it wrong now, it's fine. I'm going to hold this for a really long period of time. I can afford to be a little off there on my models, whereas the iBuyers have a really slim margin, as you can see from some of the folks who had to exit the market recently. And if I look at that type of world, it gets really, really interesting. But yeah, definitely, we see warehousing looking very similar. And there's a client of ours in the audience, which I once asked, how do you think about risk for tenants? And the answer was, well, we're not as sensitive to risk as you might think, because if they're wrong, we flip that tenant within 30 days. Like, there's the demand for these types of properties just so high that, okay, so we got wrong, the credit's not that bad. Okay, so they're not that great. It doesn't matter. We're just going to fill that space in pretty quickly, and the cost of flipping them is not that bad. So I think that's very interesting. Let's get to a little spicy. We only have a few minutes left. There are a lot of fun words that get thrown around recently, maybe in the fundraising world, but maybe not so much in our world. Metaverse, Web3 monkey, GIFs, BI solutions masquerading as data warehouses. Or maybe starting with you, are these things real? Is there anyone in your organization when they hear metaverse like, well, we should be looking into that thing, or we should be buying like monkey JPEG? Is that a thing that happens in your organization?
I need to be very careful about this one. Well, actually, no. Because, Brookfield is really a value investor. We're a owner-operator of real assets, we believe, office space. Like the fact that we're all here, not in metaverse.
That wasn't being careful, by the way, right?
It's really right. We actually, as an organization, we have been going back to the office every day, almost for everyone, since late 2020. So it's been like normal for us for over 2 years now. And the fact, we're still here, really this in-person experience, it's just not replicable in the virtual world. And now, at least, in this or the next generation, I feel like maybe people change their mind 100 years from now, but I doubt it. Like that's why we see WeWork, the original WeWork model didn't really work well, just because we do really value that kind of in-person interactive experience. Like my team, it's a young team. It's half of my projects in my pipeline all started from just a random conversation that bump into someone in the kitchen or like in the elevator. It's like 30-second pitch. So you just don't get that in the metaverse. So that's what we believe in. Again, we're real assets owner, operating investor. We believe in things that's tangible.
Raj, do you have monkey JPEGs in your pipeline for your clients?
So I serve real estate companies. So just trying to get folks to adopt Web 2.0 is my current challenge. I'll focus on 3.0 maybe in a few years. But no, honestly, I mean, I try to stay in my lane. I don't have a Facebook account or an Instagram account or anything. Like, I honestly don't even know what half this stuff is. So I'm not going to probably be the best person to answer a question about, non-fungible tokens or all the other stuff that is being thrown around. It doesn't come up a lot in my conversations. I do have a lot of customers throwing the word ML and AI around a lot. And, of course.
They really mean a decision tree 99% of the time, Drew.
We always say we definitely use all that stuff. But.
Our tagline on our website is like AI powered. I think I'll make a prediction. And I agree. I mean, like when I was in the business, like you get these information memorandums, and it's like an encyclopedia, like written text about an asset, and you like read it like you would read, Shakespearean play in school. And I think that I think the advisory side of this business and the marketing side of this business will transform into I'll use the word meta, like a meta-like experience. So imagine like you no longer get a CIM or an information memorandum or an offering memorandum with a bunch of pictures of a piece of property, but you're in your pipeline and you actually can enter that asset and work with that and view that in a way where it feels like a real-time experience on the company, the property, the thing. If you look at what's happening in the consumer space right now, when you go to e-commerce to buy a dress, you can now get in a virtual fitting room with yourself on your screen and like have a super rich, way more powerful consumer experience to buy that product. And so that technology is here, and I agree. Our industry of institutional investment, real estate, is like, what? But the advisory community that's going to market these assets, I think, is going to figure out a new way to give the investor community an experience that's way richer than just like, here's my offering memorandum, here's the cap rate, So I think that's coming. No one's really doing it yet, but I was at a conference last week on the consumer side, and I was like, oh my God, this has got to make its way into the institutional realm so that we enjoy our jobs, right? Instead of you logging into me and Raj's system and be like, here's my list of companies or here's my list of properties. Imagine if you could just experience that real time in a super rich environment where you're viewing that, interacting with that, seeing that. That tech is there. It just needs to be brought into the space and applied. So I think it'll come. I don't know how long.
Raise your hand, by the way, if you played a video game at all, any type of video game this last year. Awesome. Keep your hand up if you put a VR headset on this year. Still some nice amount.
Nice. That's cool. That's cool.
So, I 100% agree that in the near term, I hope brokers aren't sending these PDFs around anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure a virtual building tour is really what investors are ultimately looking for. I think at that initial stage when they're looking at that marketing material, honestly, they just love to be able to download the rent roll, right? They want the data, and at some point they're going to need to go visit the asset, right? We've kind of been through this with Florid and in the first version of VTS. The virtual tours thing, I think as a consumer it seems really cool. Most of the investors I know, they really just want the information, and eventually they're going to go visit the asset, right? But what I do agree with you on is that the way information is going to be exchanged is going to have to be a lot less analog in the future, right? It needs to be a lot more interactive and contextualized and all of that.
I think that on that point, I think that for those of you who have played any immersive game, you've seen what the bullshit term metaverse actually means, right? It's just another way of saying that we're going to have experiences that are going to give us a little more interactive ability with, to communicate with some other folks around us, right? And if you're talking about one metaverse, you're probably not thinking about it correctly, right? Think about app stores for Apple, app stores for Google, app stores for every environment. Each one of those environments is a separate app store. There are different gateways. They don't typically interact with each other in the way that you think. Can the apps interact? Yeah, but you're talking about different gateways. There isn't this one world that people interact with. And it's interesting to see that, again, maybe we'll ask that. Raise your hand if you're perfectly comfortable buying an asset without ever stepping into it. There you go. We got one. So that tells you kind of where this world looks like right now. It's going to be a while before we trust these environments. Say, okay, we're going to buy something that we're not going to step into there. We have just a minute left. I'm going to take a tiny bit over time here, but really, really quickly, 30 seconds, not distant future, 5, 10 years out, the next 2 to 4 years, right? Maybe 2 to 3 years, starting with Ted. What is your world looking like in 2, 3 years from now?
I think just back to my earlier point is really all about getting smart at collecting our own data first. But we talk about the metaverse, but I think the underlying technology is really great, and there's a lot of good use of that, whether it's blockchain or even the 3D cameras, right? That's actually key because I almost raise my hand when you say if you want to buy the property sight unseen. We do that all the time for SFR, right? That's how we do it. But if we can have much better quality in terms of video footage, photos, because there's no way we can visit every single home before we buy that. That's really going to help us, the overall underwriting process. We can get a better photo, better 3D models of that house and see the interior, so that we can predict out, how much we need to, make it rentable, things like that. So, let's say, between now and 3 years from now, our focus is definitely to get better and smarter at collecting our own data.
Awesome. Raj, 3 years out, what's your world look like?
I think one of the, nice things about at least half the folks in this room is we don't really have to predict what the future is going to look like because it's kind of up to us, right? At least in the little slice of the world where we operate in the sort of in real estate investment transaction space, it's going to look like, what Ben and I and my friends from TermSheet are here as well. It's what we create is actually what's going to make the difference in the next few years. And kind of alluded to it earlier, my hope is that in the next 3 years, a lot more of that process is just online. Very simply, right? The buyer and the seller are collaborating and getting the deal done online, and a lot of the information that is being exchanged and gathered and organized through that process is ending up online and staying online so that it's there at the point of sale. It's sort of there as a baseline for ongoing performance reporting and tracking. The fact that that's all currently offline, I think, is a huge problem. I don't think it's a problem we can't solve, actually, in the medium term. So 3 years out, hope we make some big progress on that front.
Ben, besides your stock trading at 25x again?
Yeah, that would be great. We've spent a decade trying to help firms get organized and go through digital transformation. So get our data in there, help us work better, help us work smarter, more efficiently. And our big move right now is trying to mine that data, not for our own benefit as a company, trying to mine that data on behalf of the customer, for the customer, to tell you where to go. So instead of sitting down, logging in, and saying, this is the thing I want to do today in your brain, we're trying to take the data that's in there and give you a message to say, we think based on this that this is what you should be doing today, and this is what you should be pursuing and where you should be going. This is who you should call. That's your best relationship, your most profitable. This is where you make the most money. And we think based on your strategy and the data we have on your strategy that this is an asset you should look at, whether it's on the market or not. And so we're trying to go from capturing, organizing digital transformation to actually enabling and making better decisions. And you can call that AI. It's really not AI. It's really just a recommendation engine to help somebody plan their day and do a little bit better. So if you think about your Microsoft Viva note that you get from Microsoft, put that in the context of your investment business, your pipeline, your deals, and we're trying to get that into the user's inbox or app.
That's awesome. Ted, Raj, Ben, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing some of your experience.
That's great, thanks.